I'm not, I will come on the gate, but I will be on ground soon.
I know.
All right,
okay for
so,
me to start?
yes,
Okay,
let's get
all right.
started.
Okay, so we were asked to talk about what you look for in a purchase and sale agreement when you're giving it the extra eye to help your clients. So obviously, when you're looking at a purchase and sale agreement, you're gonna look at it with different eyes, depending on which hat you're wearing. If you are the buyer's realtor or the seller's realtor. So what I've done in the handout I've given you is we've broken it down, and it would take literally hours to go through everything we look at, but I went with the highlights of what you should be looking at. And I broke it down to in general, regardless of which side you're on. And then on the second page, specifically when you're on one side or the other. Okay, and I think a lot of this will make sense because it's probably things that you're looking at already, okay? And this is not meant to be all inclusive. I had a purchase and sale agreement I was working on right before I left to come here, where the seller's attorney, who was also the seller, accepted all my changes and sent me the final version. And then my client said, oh, we're inheriting a tenant. And I said, really? Because it's nowhere in the offer. So there was absolutely no way I would have known they were inheriting a tenant at this 2-family that they were buying if they hadn't mentioned it at the 11th hour. So we can only, work with what we're given. So when I called the seller, also his own attorney, and I said, are you are we inheriting a set of your tenants? And he's like, oh God, I forgot about that. Yes.
Oh, that.
Oh yeah, one small thing, because it says in what he sent me as the final, free and clear of all tenants and occupants. Well, clearly that wasn't happening. So I had to go back to the drawing board and rewrite that right before I came here and finished the closing. I just stepped out. So when I go back, we're gonna have to kind of close the loop on that little thing. But it just shows that everything in the offer needs to be communicated completely to closing counsel, because we can only draft purchase and sale agreements and finalize them based on what you tell us.
And I wanted to say one other thing. We also don't know anything about the house. We've never been there. We generally have never seen it. So things like inclusions and exclusions, I can't help. I'd like to help you, but I can't. And as this happened often, when the inclusions, exclusions is kind of loose and vague. And I get asked, can you tell the attorney to put this in, tell the attorney to put that, it's on which refrigerator? And the attorney and I don't have any idea what we're talking about other than what you're telling us. Right. You're gonna spend a lot less time if you just give us the completed list. So again, we haven't seen the house, there's only so much we can guess on it, we don't wanna guess.
So, one thing that would be helpful, I think, is always having a phone call with whatever attorney you're using that's drafting the P&S for your client or reviewing it, to review the deal that was struck, to go over the offer together. Because I typically use Mitchell for all of my seller deal and buyer deals. But I just fell prey to what he's talking about. I'm doing a deal, it's an estate sale, there's another attorney involved. And we sent everything over to the attorney, but I didn't have the call with that attorney, okay? Like I normally have with him. I just kind of blinked on it, I think. And sure enough, it's like something got missed in the P&S and, well, it was in the offer. If I had just had that phone call with him, with this other attorney. Me and Mitchell in a good group though. So you get a good group with a good attorney you kind of work with.
And
just communicate.
And another thing that is important, which Ron does on all of his listings, I recommend say an inclusion exclusion list.
Can't
Very
go wrong
helpful.
with that.
What'd you say?
Can't go wrong with
Right, especially if it's signed by everybody, because then we just put the inclusion and exclusion list attached, no gray again. I mean, unless it's something that's not in the list entirely, but.
And a lot of offers are completely silent about what's included and excluded. So it'll just say all appliances and fixtures included. So when I see that and I'm the seller's attorney and I'm drafting, I often will say, and all appliances and fixtures as per MLS, and I put the MLS number. However, that's not always accurate because sometimes it might say that in MLS, but then you negotiate it, throw something else in, or to exclude something the buyer didn't want. So when we're going over this today about what to look for in a purchase and sale agreement, we're not expecting you to take the place of the attorneys representing the parties. That's not fair to you or expected. It's just to ask you to have another set of eyes on it so that something isn't missed, because you're much closer to the situation than we are.
Oh, one other thing while I'm not thinking about this. You have people that are very enraptured with the chandeliers, for example, and they want to take the chandeliers with them. Fine. So the buyer's agent says, "Oh, you have to have a replacement. You have to have lights." Okay, buyer's agent writes in there, seller takes chandeliers and replace them with other lighting. That means the buyer has no say in the quality or the lack thereof of the lighting that goes into the house, and you can be pretty comfortable. It's not as gonna be what the buyer would want. Because they're gonna do, yeah, right.
Could you say, all fixtures and appliances as seen at open house on said date?
Yeah,
So that whatever was there.
Yeah,
has
that's
to
cool.
be part of it.
that's fine, that's great. But again, you don't wanna leave loopholes.
Well, sometimes it's right in MLS, like it will say,
Right.
excluding, dining room fixture, because maybe it's something, it's a family heirloom or something. And that's okay, because most of the time when they do that, they don't have any intention of swapping it out, they're just gonna take it away. When that happens, what we do is we put language in saying they will cap the wires at least, so that you don't have like a
Yeah, that's
dangerous situation on your hands.
I don't wanna get off on this track.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's the same thing with the with televisions that are attached to walls.
Right.
The seller wants to take the television, what happens to the racks behind the television, the mounts? What happens to the hole? What happens to the wires? You can't just kick that old can down the road, because what you find out is the walkthrough the night before it takes place,
Big hole in the
and there's a big hole in the wall, and the seller did what their seller's supposed to do. Which, I mean, they were allowed to remove the TV, they took the TV. It was silent as to what would happen beyond that.
You can't go, you can never put too much in the purchase and sale agreement. The more you describe it, the better off you are, the less chance that there's any, we just want to close gray area.
Oh, yeah, I mean,
You don't want a loophole.
something simple as more than one refrigerator in the house. Taking it for a refrigerator. Okay, I don't know what refrigerator it is.
Right.
I had one the other day that had 3 refrigerators in it. The one in the kitchen, the one in the basement, oh, and there was another one in the garage. And my client's like, oh, no, we're not getting the one in the garage. Okay, but it wasn't explained
Yeah,
anyway.
don't keep it a secret.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to this in general.
Sorry.
So in general, make sure when you're looking at a purchase and sale agreement that an attorney sends you and you're giving it that extra set of eyes, make sure all the terms in your offer that you spend time crafting have made it in there. Make sure if there was an additional piece of paper, like an attachment with an inclusion, exclusion list, or a trade rider or something like that, make sure it's been incorporated somehow or attached, so you don't lose it. Because the minute that purchase and sale agreement is signed, the offer is voided. And it doesn't matter if at the
And the
closing
listing
table,
agreement means nothing
it
either.
doesn't matter.
Right.
So I've had people sit at closing with me and say, well, wait a minute, they were supposed to do X, Y, and Z. And I say, where was it in the purchase and sale agreement? Oh, it was in the offer. It doesn't matter anymore. The offer is voided. So that's why it's so important for your eyes to make sure. Because sometimes people send us the offer and they forget to send us one of the pages. That has happened multiple times. And then we find out later there was an extra page we never saw. And if we had, it would have been incorporated.
I want to say something. I called Mitchell a couple weeks ago about this. And this is a big one. This is about commissions. This is about you getting paid and nobody got paid. And I've never seen anything like it. I know that Mitchell said he's
Okay.
never seen anything like it. And basically the language that was put in there from the buyer's offer said commission to be split with buyer. Like, that's all it said.
What does that mean?
What does it mean? Means the
Right,
client
right,
said-
and again, Mitchell didn't represent this transaction.
I
had to
wasn't
call-
on-
This had nothing to do, I had to call Mitchell because
Did you
I
have
was
a
like,
second?
hold on 1 second. So basically, I get what the agent was saying. The agent was saying because it was with somebody else in our office, that it was a non-MLS listing. So the agent had a listing agreement signed for a certain percentage. They already had a verbal conversation. And they said, you know what, just put this light language in. So listen, when you're doing transactions, no one's your friend. Okay, no one is your friend. You represent the buyers and you represent the sellers. If me and Ron have a conversation about this and he says, you know what, just throw in there, commission will be split at closing. Absolutely not. It is not an if what, then what, which is why we're having this class today. It doesn't end there. It's too vague. on what's going to
And
happen.
the people that are drafting the documents
Right.
aren't privy to that
Yeah,
discussion. So all we're gonna do is copy it or something like that, and it's missing language. So
and so that didn't get to the
you
purchase
you
and
have to,
sale.
and I know, I'm just gonna sound funny, I don't mean to it. You have to make believe we're idiots. Because the only way, and that we can't
Ouch.
interpret.
Hey, can I
Choose
just,
one.
can I just say something?
Right now.
That's my entire philosophy in this entire industry. Everybody I'm talking to at
No,
every point
But if you
is
treat,
someone of an idiot, all right?
but that will
Talking
put
with
you in a
their 2 years
position
old.
of giving more
Anyway.
versus less information.
But you know what, I don't know about idiot, but I would say it's more of a football game. Like, the quarterback passed the ball to the next person and to whatever else is gonna happen, and so I was involved with the clients, the agent on the other side, I wrote the offer, I have the most knowledge. If I'm just sending you over a quick offer with no explanation or phone call from me to Mitchell about, I sent this offer over, you have the black and white version, here's some stuff you need to know. That's on you as the buyer agent who checked off, or listing agent who checked off that disclosure. And you do have a care, obedience, due diligence to the attorney and the lenders to have these conversations, because it takes all these characters to put together the successful closing. On this example, it didn't get into the purchase and sale. Long story short, nobody got paid.
Well, but doesn't the listing agreement,
Okay, don't.
We won't get into it, but just know
Don't go down the
that,
rabbit hole.
just know,
wait a minute,
I know, I'll inform you later.
It
But
was a really bad,
wow.
not only was it bad, but everybody was not protected, everybody was at
No.
fault.
I mean, I thought it was, the realtoring job wasn't great. That's great.
Right, it was all a mess, but this is really important when you're writing. And I think what happens, and I'm serious, the offer to purchase only has 2 lines at additional terms and conditions. I've talked to Mitchell about this, I love that we're on the same page, see addendum A.
Right.
Period, and then start a Word document called addendum A to 30 Tanglewood Lane, and write all of your if, what, then what. I feel like agents feel pressure just to put like room swept, bracket left, this, and it's like not, please leave the bracket in the living room.
Yeah, you can't treat it as a
Right.
boilerplate stuff.
Yeah, and this is important because we're seeing a lot of careless stuff.
Like the example I just gave you, that I was working on an hour ago, where come to find out there was a tenant, do you know how we figured that out? Now, my buyer client read it, didn't notice anything wrong. The seller, who was his own attorney and has the tenant, finalized it, didn't notice there was anything wrong. But because I sent the purchase and sale agreement, not just to my clients, but to their realtor to review, she all of a sudden, like the light went on and she contacted me and said, oh my God, Anne-Marie, we didn't tell you. There's supposed to be tenant, like she realized it was a mistake in the offer. So she marked it all up and sent it back to me and said, I'm so sorry, we're inheriting a tenant. This is what this has to say. And also there's 2 sets of this and 2 sets of that and 1 microwave. I'm like, I'm gonna fix it all. Thank you. But none of that was in the offer. So if her second set of eyes had looked at it and we had just done it between the attorneys and my clients hadn't questioned it, it would have gone out to be signed and maybe not necessarily anybody would have noticed. So it always, the more eyes to look at something, the better off you are. Okay, so we can get on to the next page. We're still in the in general section. So we talked about that. Check, this seems like a small point, but check the math. You know, I've had a lot of times lately where people put down $1,000 binder check. And then we always want to put usually 5% minus $1,000 for the second deposit, right? And some people do the math. Some people just put 5%. And then I've had people say to
So
me,
$1,000 is.
is it $1,000 minus? Is it plus? And then, you know, you waste so much time over silly things like that. So just do your math. Make sure the parties listed on the purchase and sale agreement match, okay? So we've talked about this ad nauseum. We always pull a deed to make sure we have the right people or the right title holding entity, like a trust or an LLC, or maybe there's a successor trustee. That's our job to make sure. You should make sure that when you're doing a listing, so that you've got the right person signing it, otherwise you will never get paid because you don't have a valid contract. And then buyers, sometimes you have like a buyer sign the offer, and then you find out later, like in the one I just did, that it's actually 3 buyers. because it was the dad who signed the offer, but his wife and his daughter are
I
also gonna be
have one on my
co-buyers.
desk right now, where the offer has the daughter, no mom and dad. If I don't pull the deed and then say to my client, the conversation of basically is your parents still alive? I don't know that there's additional owners.
Sometimes there are no attorneys involved, or there are attorneys involved and they do a very quick down and dirty purchase and sale where they don't put anything on it, they don't add riders. If you do nothing else, make sure there's a notice provision,
What?
a notice provision.
Notice.
Okay, it's not in the standard purchase and sale. Well, there it is in the Mass Association of Realtor form, but oftentimes people, if the realtors are preparing those, they just put in the names of the parties. The parties should be dealing directly with each other, particularly if there are attorneys involved. Notice should be between the attorneys. So if there's an attorney on both sides, there should be a notice provision saying notice goes to counsel for the parties and then the information. If there's an attorney on one side, let's say there's a seller's attorney, there's no buyer's attorney. Okay, then the person who should be noticed for the buyer, it should be the buyer's agent. So there should be a degree of separation of who gets the notice and who's representing the parties. So if you don't see that in there, question it. How do we give notice? Because if you represent a buyer and they need an extension on their financing, how are you gonna know how to do it so that it's a valid extension request if you don't know who gets notice, right? So it's a simple thing, but it's something you wanna make sure is always in there. Make sure that, lately we're putting in COVID provisions, regardless of which hat you're wearing. Because everybody can get sick. Happily, we're getting better, but it doesn't mean it's gone. And I have had a few situations where like sellers ended up in the hospital and they couldn't sell the property on the day because no one could notarize their signature. Or a buyer, got sick and couldn't go and go to the bank, so happily it's only happened a handful of times, but that's why you're seeing COVID provisions. Hopefully we won't need those much longer. All right, let's go on to page 2. So now we're gonna break it down to when you're wearing the seller's rep hat and you're wearing the buyer rep hat. Okay, you're representing the seller. You're a listing agent, you're looking at a purchase and sale agreement for your client. Something that happens so much that it makes me crazy when I'm a seller's attorney is that I get a purchase and sale back and the buyer's attorney just unilaterally changed the loan amount and made it larger than what it was.
Right, because that means that they were gonna put 20% down, but the loan officer gets involved and says, well, you're really better off with an FHA loan or a 5% down or whatever it is. And so they just change it. Well, no, that's not the deal. Now, that doesn't mean it can't be the deal. It just means it isn't the deal as we presently stand.
That can never be done unilaterally. If the buyers want to borrow more, when I'm a seller's attorney, I'm a hard butt, and I will say, go borrow 100% if you want it, but don't change my loan amount, because you have to be at least willing to get the 80% loan if you can't get the 100% loan.
So if they change it after offer to purchase was accepted, we're going to purchase and sale and we notice there's a change. Does the seller still have to work with these buyers?
No.
Can they deny it and say, you change terms and
Yes.
conditions where X thing
Change the
you out?
Yeah, you can say, and usually that's where the negotiations come in, because I've had buyer's attorneys call me, oh, Emily, we got this great deal, they're getting a great interest rate if they borrow 90% instead of 80, and I say, again, that's great, let them do it. But if they don't get approved for 90, I want them to take 80, because that's what my clients, you can't bait and switch people.
So what we're seeing right now in our office is cash offers, like cash, they're accepted, and then they're like, we've decided to take a loan out.
9 out of 10 times, right?
Right, so now the terms and conditions 100% have changed, and so we've had this question, but we're seeing that to get the offer accepted.
Right.
And then changed and just slid in.
Well, that's a lot of buyers agents are just, because they have to try to get these deals accepted. So they're putting literally anything and hoping that it can be massaged during the P&S stage.
Well, when I hear that it's a cash transaction and I represent the seller, that's the first question I ask my agent. Is it really cash or is it just non-finance?
Oh, and just so you know.
They waive financing, but they're really getting a mortgage.
Right, I mean, if I were the agent and I had a client, I wouldn't necessarily say that. I would say waiving
financing.
Because reserving the option of getting a mortgage
And changing the terms.
no, nothing changes.
No, meaning that you're protecting somebody to not change to go over to get the mortgage, because even if they did get the mortgage, they're still responsible for the amount.
Okay, but you know what we're missing? You're the listing agent.
Mhm.
Someone brings you an offer, this is a cash deal. What's the first thing you're gonna ask for?
We need the proof.
Proof of funds, right. But they
that's
don't give you
even
proof of funds and they give you a pre-approval letter instead, then you know they're just waiving the financing.
Which is,
Where's the
which is
money?
okay, but you're right, it's a
But
change,
it's a change.
and the seller has to say it's okay.
And
But
make
that-
sure the proof of funds is in the name of the person who made the offer.
That's
I mean, I have a kid come in, he's a PhD student, he's getting a kiddie condo in Cambridge, and he makes the offer, and then they get proof of funds of mom and dad's bank account. Gee, that's nice. Then I want mom and dad on the goddamn
Is
PNS.
that before the offer was accepted?
Yes, so if someone brings you an offer with proof of funds and you're the listing agent, read the proof of funds. It can be redacted. The account number can be redacted, not the name.
But most attorneys, and again, you're speaking for a lot of them, but will they add the parents on to the purchase and sale when they see that? Or is that something
I
that
will
everyone
question it.
should be really
Good
looking
question.
for?
You should
When
absolutely
you're
question it in the
proceeding.
offer stage. You should say, who's got the money?
Because in the
It doesn't
office
matter
comes
if
from
mom
that
and dad aren't gonna live there. I don't care. Mom and dad have the money, so they should be on the PNS.
Yeah.
Even if the eventual deed, if they say, hey, we were just gonna give them the money, we don't have to be on title, who cares? Mickey Mouse can be on title. We don't care. We care what's on the purchase and sale agreement.
Yeah.
So if it's a cash transaction or it's finance, mom and dad are co-signers, okay? So you have a pre-approval with 3 people on it. 3 people better be on the purchase and sale agreement, not just the kid. Because the kid doesn't have the ability to get a mortgage, he needs mom and dad. Eventually, at the closing table, if the bank's okay with it, just the kid can be on the deed. By then, we're closing, we have the money, we don't care.
Okay, curveball, only he goes on to the purchase and sale,
He's a kid.
the kid, parents don't go on the purchase and sale, but he gets denied. Even though we knew as real estate
Who's on the
agents,
pre-approval?
let's say that the kid's on, well, both, because right, the parents are co-signing, but that doesn't go into the purchase and sale, but they.
Well,
need
that's
to
what we're
co-sign.
talking about, we wanna close that loophole.
But if
No,
they
but if you
didn't,
didn't,
if they
if you
didn't.
didn't,
If
if the
on
loan
there,
gets denied before the contingency date, they get the money
get
back.
the money back.
If
And the
loan,
money back.
right, if the loan denied after the contingency date, it was the
But
fund.
if the parents were there, it would have protected that too, because then they would have gone to them for co-signing for funding. So that
Well, I
wouldn't
mean,
happen
I
to
guess
the
it's
seller.
possible that the parents could have been denied as well, like maybe they thought they could liquidate funds that they couldn't liquidate or something, there's different things that could happen. The bottom line is, the moral of the story is, make sure the money, the pre-approval or the proof of funds match who you have on your contract, so that you have somebody to hold responsible. Check that the financing date matches the offer. So people do what you told me, it's a rabid seller's market, you guys are doing whatever you can to get your offers accepted, you put in a crazy 2-week financing deadline. And the seller loves that and takes the offer. Then we get to the purchase and sale agreement and the buyer's attorney throws another 2 weeks on it. That makes me out of my mind. I would rather they called me and asked me, hey, listen, I talked to the bank, they said there's just no way we can do this, can you ask your clients if they would be so kind? Sure, I'll ask anything. Don't try to slip in a different date on me. That's just,
And I agree with Anne Marie on this, and I'll be honest with you. All these things sound great in the offer and the acceptance stage of doing this in 10 minutes and all this kind of stuff. But the reality is, if you already know when you're doing that you're not gonna meet the dates, let's not waste everybody's time. Let's just get it out on the table, the seller can say, great, or the seller can say, you know something, I'm gonna pass because this isn't what I was presented. But again, I use the expression kicking the can down the road. Don't kick it down the road, knowing that you're not gonna meet the dates. Because all you're doing is causing more hardship for your buyers and your sellers. It's like, how did this happen?
And I will say that, we have a duty, it's fair and honest business dealing with both parties. So if you think you're gonna try to get an offer accepted by faking information, it's really not the integrity way of doing things, okay? Do what you say you can do. Don't put it on paper if it can't be done with reasonable expectations. You don't wanna develop that reputation as that agent. We put stuff down that can't happen, it's gotta be
Yeah,
changed all the
the
time.
bait and switch stuff will
not be
catch
right.
up to you. The bait and switch stuff will catch up to you.
be careful in the financing section, look in the fine print, particularly at the end. Buyer's attorneys love to slip in about appraisal contingencies. They were never in the offer to begin with. And we've talked about this, I know, ad nauseum. If it's 20% down payment or less, it really doesn't matter, because if it doesn't come in at the price, they're gonna get denied anyway. But if you have someone who's only borrowing 60% in the offer, and your client's saying, oh, this is great, I'm only borrowing 60%, so if the appraisal comes in a little low, I'm still good. And then we get the purchase and sale agreement, and the buyer's attorney has slipped in an appraisal contingency that wasn't in the offer. Bing, 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 that should go off, like, you know, something's not right. I know you've had to put in like thresholds sometimes, like, okay, my client will go forward and make up the difference as long as it comes in no less than the list price, or no less than whatever X is, you know, that's fine too, as long as that was in the offer and it makes itself into the purchase and sale agreement, and nothing more creative makes its way into the purchase and sale agreement. Check municipal assessments. Now, I can't see I'm thinking of the Mass Association of Realtor Board form, which I know you use more here, and I'm having trouble figuring out what provision this is in, but in the Greater Boston Real Estate Board form, which I use more frequently, and I can see it right in front of me, paragraph 4 says, you take title subject to assessments of record at the date of the agreement. Meaning, if there was an assessment that was, let's say a sidewalk assessment from 3 years ago that the seller is still paying off, the seller has to satisfy that because it predates the contract.
It's a lien,
Okay,
just
it's a
like a
lien.
mortgage or, you know.
That was just, everybody knows about it, it's already there, and even if they don't know about it, when they pull the municipal lien certificate, they'll see it was a pending sewer assessment. And unless it's said in the offer, the buyer was going to be assuming it, the seller has to pay it off. What you have to be careful with, and 9 out of 10 buyers' attorneys do this. I don't, just because I think it's kind of sleazy. But 9 out of 10 buyers' attorneys correct that and say the day of closing, so that the seller ends up stuck with an assessment for the future. No, the buyer's attorney changes it to say the day of closing.
I'm sensitive to the buyer.
So the buyer shifts the payment to the seller for something that isn't even gonna happen until after closing.
Future.
What if there's a $20,000 sewer assessment that gets levied after you sign the contract? The seller's not gonna get the benefit of the sewer assessment, the buyer is. And the buyer can pay it over 10 years on their tax bill. The seller could, if you let them get away with that change, the seller is now selling the property for $20,000 less than they thought they were getting, because they're paying for something that's gonna benefit the buyer. So I always cross that right back on the standard language, and they always say, okay, you know, I tried. But you have to keep an eye out for stuff like that.
Another word for that up in our area is betterment. So,
Betterments or assessments,
betterments.
right. Now, when it comes to condominiums, that's a different deal, because you know, if you represent someone buying a condo, there could be assessments. And when you're a buyer's agent, you should be checking with the property manager to see if there are any current or pending assessments, so that your buyer doesn't get stuck with something they weren't expecting to pay a few short months into the, you know, ownership of the property. And that can be negotiated and put in the offer and then make its way into the purchase and sale agreement. Over the past 4 or 5 years, since the mortgage regulations changed, which now you understand there's TRIB language, meaning buyers have to get closing disclosures at least 3 business days prior to closing, or they can delay the closing by federal law. And if something changes, like the interest rate goes up by more than an 8, or the closing costs go up by a certain percentage, it might trigger another 3 days. What I see all the time is people putting in like crazy amounts of time. Like when this first happened, when the law first changed, we were all saying, you can delay up to 8 days. The reality is you don't need 8 days. The worst it's ever gonna be is 3 days. So I always cut that back. So if you get a TRID rider, closing disclosure rider with your offer, look and see how many extra days they built into that, so that your seller isn't sitting around for potentially more than a week because of that. All right, so that's, so anybody have any questions on representing sellers? Now we're moving over to representing buyers. Do you wanna start?
Yeah, I mean, default damage clause needs to say it is a sole remedy at law in equity. Most contracts have that language in there, so that's really on us more than it's on you to make sure that it's in there. Rarely do I see a situation like that.
Because that establishes liquidated damages.
Right, because what you don't want to do is have your buyer, if they default, lose their deposit and get sued for specific defaults. So, but again, our job really doesn't come up too much anymore. Used to, not so much. Okay. Again, this is kind of on us too. Financing clause should stipulate that a commitment must only contain conditions within the buyer's reasonable control. For example, commitment comes in and is subject to tax returns for 2021. And this was
From the IRS.
from the IRS. And this is February, when the tax return for 2020. 2020 isn't done yet, but the bank is calling for it, so that is beyond your control. And so you have to ask for extensions and things like that, because that's not, and that's not something that the buyer has any control over, because of the time. Make sense?
Subject to appraisal, that's way beyond the control.
Yeah, right. Okay, we talked about the TRID provision. If the buyer has a mortgage, you want to have that in there so the buyer doesn't get screwed because the bank couldn't get documents out in time.
If you had it in the offer, make sure it's in the P&S. If you didn't have it in the offer, still make sure it's in the P&S. Because if you have a financing contingency that was allowed by the seller, a TRID rider or TRID provision should be hand in glove.
Right, as is clauses. Right now, since there are virtually no home inspections, you want to put in the language that it is as of the offer to purchase. Okay? Make sense?
Or the inspection if you have one.
Or if you have inspections, as inspection, but you're not having too many as of the inspections because there aren't any. So you want to make sure it says offer. That's just sloppy because a lot of lawyers, their boilerplate says as of inspection and they don't change it. Because they may not even know there was no home inspection. So we have to check for it. You should check for it as well.
So the most dangerous thing you could see is if you have a seller's attorney giving you the provision that says buyer takes it as is, period. As is when? As of the day of the closing? What if a tree falls in the house? So it has to say as is when. It can't just say as is ever under any circumstances.
Right, because you're opening yourself up to as is forever.
That day.
Right.
And what do you recommend, as far as the as-is, what date do you recommend, like closing date, or does that depend on whether it's the buyer or the seller?
If it's a seller, you wish it just said as is, period, but no one, I don't even do that and represent a seller, that's not fair. So I always say it's as, if there was an inspection, they should turn the house over the way it was at the time of the inspection, or as otherwise detailed in the contract. Because maybe the inspection said that you had to, make a repair that you negotiated, and the repair is in the contract, that's fine. So then I say, as is, as at the time of the home inspection, or as otherwise detailed herein. If there was no inspection, then what Mitchell just said, as is, as of the time of buyer's offer to purchase. So they have to turn the property over.
That's the last time the
the way
buyer
they
was
saw it.
in the house, and the buyer saw the house, and they were entitled to the condition as it was, as of that, at the time they did their offer. It can't be afterwards, and then obviously you don't want that before, so.
A lot of sellers don't get that. Like their dishwasher breaks the week before the closing. And they're like, why don't you fix that? Because I sold it as is. Well, not quite. It's on you until the closing. If it breaks the day after the closing, then it's on the buyer.
Yeah, I always think we're wrong. We had a situation years ago,
A few times.
something with the heating system, I think, just died
Like the day after.
the day after the closing. And we had the seller, and he's getting haunted by the people on the other side.
And they don't.
And the answer was, too bad. Too bad. Unless you want to make a stab at trying to prove that the seller defrauded the buyer, that's really hard.
Do you remember when we bought our house in 1993? A couple of weeks before the
No, I
closing,
don't remember that.
listen to this, a couple of weeks before the closing, their dishwasher died. So our realtor called and said, oh, you're getting a brand new dishwasher now because the dishwasher, I'm like, score.
Did the right thing.
Or you could get a used one.
They didn't, they bought us a brand new one.
But it doesn't have to be.
No, you're correct, but they did get us a,
Remember that. You go to buy a used, similar style dishwasher and put it in, it doesn't have to be brand new.
Working condition, yeah.
Working
not-
condition.
yes, Brian.
What about when people say something to the effect of waiving inspections except for informational purposes?
I know, we love that.
Yeah, informational
Right,
purposes.
when
and then-
are they doing it, before or after the purchase and sale agreement?
Well, it's like I'm thinking of New Hampshire, whether the.
You sign a PNS and then
Yeah.
you have usually a week or 10 days
Yeah,
afterwards to get out
and
of it.
so they're saying things like, only for informational purposes, if they don't find anything over $10,000, we're not gonna renegotiate or, blah, blah, blah. So they're putting in
Yeah.
Cash.
up to 10 grand, we won't come after you, anything less than 10 grand, continue on.
That's more dangerous in New Hampshire though, because in New Hampshire, you sign the purchase and sale rate and you tender the whole deposit. So if you pull something, then you can lose the whole thing. In Massachusetts, it gets tricky because people usually put $1,000 binder check down. They say, oh, it's info only, but they want to do it before they put the second one
Right,
down.
right.
Because they'll walk away from $1,000, which happens. That's why when someone comes to me and says it's info only, I'm like, it's only info only if you put your money down and you do it after you sign the purchase and sale.
And, well, your thousands of risk, but the info only,
Loss leader.
that's what it means. I hate when buyers do info only and then they don't like something
Yeah.
and they want, it's like they never said it. Okay, that's the ultimate bait and switch right there. So,
But even in this market, I've seen sellers who get worn out. Like I had represented a seller a few weeks ago. This happened. They signed, the buyer signed, put down all their money and did the info only inspection afterward and came up with something pretty significant and said to them, I'm not closing, sue me. I'm not gonna give you, I'm not signing up for my deposit and I'm not gonna, you have to fix this. And the seller, threw some money at them to make it go away. Because they just wanted to close, they didn't want to deal with the lawsuit.
The info only thing has been around for so long, and there's been so many different nuances about it. What I've learned is absolutely contact the buyer's agent on their intention, be more descriptive. Because, I say, all right, you're gonna have an inspection prior to PNS, it's info only. Do you mean, you want your deposit back if you don't like it?
yeah, what happens,
You still have an inspection contingency to get your money back.
Right.
But is it, or you're just saying, we're gonna have it, we're waiving our contingency, you have to spell it out.
Absolutely,
And by
absolutely.
the way, all home inspections are for information. Right, it's like info only, okay, what do you mean, you're just not gonna come back and ask us to make it?
So they're still gonna have the inspection, correct?
Right, yeah, but they're saying it's not contingent upon.
Right, you're saying.
Well, you can't renegotiate anything.
Right, right.
However, it's not that it's false, but especially if it's FHA, that sound and safe they'll get denied anyway
Yeah,
because of that. But if it's conventional or anything different, no, you really can't go back and you're like, you can ask anything. You know what, we want you to fix this, or, that we thought this was working. If they choose not to though, then they can choose not to at the seller at that point.
The buyer can choose.
Right, and if the buyer chooses to walk away, they'll lose their purchase and sale money. But that has to be explained. Like, you as a buyer agent, you have to explain that. If they choose to walk away by having a home inspection after, and there's something major, foundation.
Correct.
It's something like that. The radon is a big one, right? And the seller's like, I'm not doing any of that. I'm not putting in a kit for $3,200. I'm not this. The seller has to understand, writing an offer is like going to Foxwoods. Like, you're gonna put $1,000 down on the table, and the worst is if you go with home inspection, you pay a home inspector $500, you walk away, so you get $1,000 back, so you're really only into it for $500. But that's what it is. And so every step of that, the more money you start putting down, you're gambling that to hopefully have what the intent was. But these
Yeah,
things
some
go
people
wrong.
want to lock down.
In this market, we're seeing that,
15,000.
but you really shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
You should never be putting down, and I have this conversation, I'm sitting next to somebody that loves to have conversations like this too. You really should not be putting down, it's 3 to 5% with purchase and sale. You're doing a bad duty to your buyers if they're like, we've decided we want to be aggressive and put $150,000 down. Well, I'm gonna tell you something, I would put that in writing in an email, I'd get it stamped, probably notarized, I'm not sure, because I wanna make sure that I have that conversation with them, that if anything should go wrong, it doesn't fall into, you were denied, you died.
Look up
this,
liquidated damages.
You will not come after me. And so that's a big conversation, but these conversations should be had prior to you showing properties.
Right.
And setting expectations in this crazy market on how it's gonna go. You shouldn't be deciding those conversations at the hot seat of like, we're gonna put an offer in, we're just gonna do this, we're gonna do that. Like, that's the whole buyer
So
consultation.
to Jamie's point, well, the buyer consultation is very lengthy typically, my experience. So what she's talking about, I typically have a second meeting with the client, all right? And it's way before we're writing offers, okay? And it's like, hey, there's an 8-page purchase and sales agreement in New Hampshire. Let's come into the office, have a cup of coffee and review this. And we take an hour and go through it. So that when we're writing an offer on a Sunday evening, you don't have to like, what is this, what is that, what is this? And we bang it out. And I found very, very good results from that. So do that. But the next question I had, and this came up, I called you at length about it the other day.
Did I give you a good answer?
And this, and you're gonna modify the PNSs about this, okay? Because now what we're seeing is people are waiving home inspections. They sign a PNS, and there's a little clause in the PNS that says the buyer will have the right to 3 visits at the home.
The access,
24
the
hours
access
access,
provision.
right? And so now buyers are setting up inspections for the access period, which is very vague and open as to what that appointment can be for. Commonly and customarily, it's for measurements and maybe get a contract
Appraisal.
or two.
One thing is the appraisal.
Things like that.
You wanna
Now-
show your
Now,
cards?
now Mitchell and I talked about it at length, and we've decided that based upon its current writing, not much you can do to say no to that unless, you know, people, seller can say you can't get the F in my home, whatever, right? But that's not really the way it's gonna work, because they have the right to get in the house. They can have this and they don't wanna buy the home, their deposit is definitely at risk at that point. So why don't you talk a little bit about that, and like maybe, should we be redefining that little paragraph to stipulate
Talking
what
about
those
what can be
appointments
done
are
on
for?
those.
The access.
Right, because it causes a lot of tension.
Yeah.
Causes and fear and concern, and we wanna try to keep our clients on the love boat.
I think the only one that it concerns, to be honest, and this is controversial, it's you agents. It's really not the seller and the buyer. The buyer and the seller really don't even know some of this information. When we get involved, sometimes we make it more complicated. I don't know why, but we do.
Well,
And
you
so
want-
this is
because
an
people
agent
wanna
problem.
Want to protect their clients.
Yes.
They want to reduce the risk.
It's an agent problem. I mean, you can put in up to 3 times for, you know, add like measurements, blah, 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 for no longer than maybe a 45-minute visitation and just maybe do a
That's-
if, what,
that's
then
what
what,
we talked
right?
about.
But at the end of the day, I've seen agents fight with the attorneys. The attorneys go back and forth. J9's one of them. She wants this many in there. And another attorney would be like, that is just ridiculous. You don't need up to 7 times or whatever she puts, right?
One appointment.
You only need this. But you know who started that? The agents, because buyers and sellers, they don't get that. Just remember it sometimes when you decide to step in with this like value that you're adding. The intention was there, but sometimes you're not really adding the value, you're actually causing a problem.
And the one thing I did say to Ron when we had this lengthy conversation, that you can mark it up all you want in terms of modifying that clause. But if you're on the seller side and you don't want somebody coming in, you just say no. And it doesn't have to be mean, rotten.
No, but you can't allow, but hold on.
No, I don't.
You can't allow a financing contingency and not allow the appraiser in. That's the main purpose of the access provision, is the appraiser is one of those visits. So don't leave it open-ended, where it just says you can have, some of them just say, and even sellers are trying to put in, reasonable access, you know,
Can't be open-ended.
and I'm like, no, well, you know, like, when I'm a seller's attorney, I make it very strict for appraisal, taking measurements, you know, and not to exceed X number of visits. And then they're indemnifying my client if they slip and fall while they're there, you know, that kind of thing. So you have to be careful,
That's
but you can't just close down an access provision. There has to be one.
But
Yeah.
you also have to stay in your lane, and I feel as though that if I went to Mitchell one day and I wrote my first offer and I went through a training and I was like, and I want you to put in this and I want that, Mitchell would turn around and say, I respect all that you're saying, but this is what we're going to do because this is the standard of my firm to protect some of the things that you're learning, like put in 7, put in 5. I honestly think it just becomes complicated. And attorneys don't like that. It already starts off bad when you have an agent that's like, and I want you to change, adjust.
You can't protect people 100% of risk.
Right.
Is the risk shifts back and forth in the course of the transaction, but it's never going to be zero. till the day everybody gets their money and you can pass the keys, it's very important. You can't do it. So if that's your intention, you're gonna be very principled, but very poor, because you're not gonna get any transactions closed. So it's all about give and take, it's all about, and I do have to talk to realtors oftentimes and say, okay, it's a little much this time, depending on how well I know their agent, how frank I can be. But again, it's a give and take relationship. You're not going to be able to close every potential loophole and still get a deal done, especially in a market like this where things are so tilted. Because the sellers just, sellers just will take no pound sand.
I know that we were just talking about purchase and sales, but one of my questions is a lot of agents, they tell the seller that they don't need representation on their side.
Oh, I hate that.
And so we have 5 minutes left.
Wait a
and this
minute,
is
the
recorded.
listing agent tells their client you don't need a lawyer?
Listen,
Whoa.
So,
Bad advice.
again, some people in here could be like, whoa, but there could be people on this call that fall to that, or people that watch it. And so you take a couple of minutes and just explain why it's not just most of us are trained that, oh, with a buyer client, you get the attorney. Okay? But explain the seller side on why we as agents shouldn't be doing any of that. I would rather Mitchell all day long take my seller client, even if I had to pay the $850 or whatever a flat fee could be. I don't want that happening, but tell them some of the things that maybe the reasons.
Well, first of
why.
all, at first glance, it's the seller's side responsibility to prepare the purchase and sale agreement. Last time I checked, none of you have ESQs after your name, and that is,
Don't do it.
and that is preparing a legal document.
Okay, most experienced agents, and we know who they are, were trained, I'll start the purchase and sale, I have a standard purchase and sale that I fill out. And so I think that's what happens, is you see them, because you
Correct.
see them come in.
But unless you want to take legal malpractice
Right.
responsibility for that document that you've been using for 20 years, don't do it.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know, Mitchell's practice is centered here in the Merrimack Valley in southern New Hampshire. My practice, as you know, is centered in Middlesex and Suffolk and Norfolk counties, close to the city. And I'm gonna tell you that maybe 20 years ago, I had all the realtors in that market coming to me, and other people have been doing this as long as I have been, saying, we don't wanna prepare purchase and sale agreements. Should we be? And we said, absolutely not. And none of them do. I'm telling you, none of them touch a purchase and sale
That's
agreement.
not the case.
Because I know, I'm saying to you, maybe you just gotta start protecting yourself and thinking like them.
Well,
Because
here's the
they're like,
problem.
we don't wanna take responsibility.
Here's the
They
problem.
expect representation.
Yeah.
I'll give you a very basic problem. We have agents who are afraid of their clients. We have agents who think it's their responsibility to save their clients money. But they don't want to take responsibility for what that means. You have to say to your client, Susan Roper taught me this years ago, you don't say to your buyer or seller, as the case may be, are you going to be hiring a lawyer? That's not the question. The question is, who is your lawyer? You said about earlier how the clientele don't know the difference.
Right,
They don't know if they need a
they're
lawyer.
hiring you to be told what to do
They're
and how to
exactly
let.
right.
And if
So
you're
unless
picking
you have
it up-
someone that's bought and sold 5 houses, which is
Yeah.
very rare, they're gonna ask, they're asking you, like Jamie just said, to tell them what to do. A legal fee on a seller rep is not gonna kill, shouldn't kill a transaction. And that's the problem, but you guys got to stand up for yourselves, because I'm telling you, that situation that Jamie and I were talking about before, that could have been disastrous.
Oh, everybody and their mom was sued.
Could have been disastrous.
The agents here,
Right.
the loan officer, the attorneys,
Right.
our company.
Right.
Everybody
And-
would have been sued.
That's all.
And that's not what we're in the business here of doing.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to talk to you about giving you personal legal advice. I will, but I don't want to because you don't want me to.
Yeah.
So, anyway, so
I
that's.
don't even remember the last time I had a transaction that didn't have a lawyer on either side. I'm just saying,
That's what-
it spreads out.
That, you know, and I love doing work in New Hampshire. I hate the way work is done in New Hampshire. I hate it because I get something that's already done. I get something that's already finished. I have no say in it.
It's harder to protect.
It's a part,
Like the offer is like the offer is like, it's like a promissory note, but like the offer is the beginning stages, the purchase and sale really locks it in.
correct.
And just to finish, because it's 1:00, at the beginning of our training today, Mitchell said, make sure that what you've put in your offer somehow in different categories gets translated as that into purchase and sale. Because here's the thing, as soon as your buyer signs the purchase and sale, so as soon as your buyer signs the purchase and sale, that is the new contract. And if the buyer wasn't explained, I didn't know this wasn't put in. If the buyer's agent was like, well, Mitchell, you should have put it in. If Mitchell's like, well, nobody told me about, and you see how it goes around? That is somewhat of kind of what happened that caused $20,000 of commissions to be disappeared with agents, okay? And that really has to be explained because it's not my job to explain the purchase and sale. But in this day and age, I know a lot of attorneys, they, you know, if they're not signing them electronically, they're going to their house, maybe sign here, do you have any questions? And most people don't really have any questions because they think that they hired Mitchell and that
No,
I
I
don't have
get
any
asked.
questions.
I get asked,
You know?
the question I get asked is something I should be looking for.
Yeah.
And what I say is, you should be looking at, make sure the names are correct, make sure that the money is correct, make sure that the dates are correct, make sure the inclusion exclusion is correct. That's kind of all I need from a buyer. The rest of it's my job. So that, you know,
And a good attorney team will be reaching out to the agent as well.
of course,
Make sure I have everything here, and I have a question on this. It's
No.
not like you're just functionarily taking something and doing it.
No,
You're looking at stuff too.
it's really easy if I just get a document and say, okay, I'll send it to my client and let them read it and flummox around with it, and then, that's it.
One last thing though, I know it's time to end, but beyond the PNS, there are still other aspects that the attorneys are very needed for, especially on the seller side, with deed issues with like, you know,
There's title problems.
title problems, things like that. So it's not just drafting this PNS and that's all you need them for.
No.
There's a lot of other stuff.
All right, yes, ma'am.
Just real quickly, aren't attorneys required in Massachusetts on both sides?
No.
Oh, I thought it was in New Hampshire.
Only attorneys can close loans in Massachusetts. We are not a title company state, we are an attorney certification
but
state.
Prior to that, no.
You elect whether you have personal representation.
I mean, I guess hypothetically, if you have a cash deal, literally for cash, you don't have any lawyers at all.
But somebody has to search the title.
Yeah, but, or you don't really have to. You're supposed
Even
to.
if you don't, shame on you. Don't ever let anybody do that.
All right, thank you, everybody,
Thank
for
you,
joining
everybody.
today's call.
Thanks a lot, Sue. Nice job.